That's the key to understand, that as a man, the glory that Christ gained wasn't glory earned for himself. He was already glorified. He was the Word, the one above angels, the one above Moses. He was the ultimate expression of God to bring people to God. But this glory he earned as a man, and the glory he earned as a man, he gave to men. Every time you and I suffer, every annoyance we have in life and little squabble we have, Jesus understands. He experienced those feelings and problems just as we did, experienced life as a man, and came to understand man and the problems and suffering man has. It's easy to sometimes look at our problems and not even think of offering them up to God. When we think of our own suffering compared to our Lord, we think that it couldn't even compare. We might even think it's wrong to ask, to bother God with the trivial problems we think we have. But that's not true. To Jesus, we're family, and every concern we have, every worry and fear, he understands it and wants to hear it. Imagine back to when you were a child. Imagine your own little brother or sister or another younger family member you might have had. Now imagine that younger sibling or relative was frightened by a lightning storm or a loud sound and came to you for comfort. You would know that there wasn't anything to be hurt by. But at the same time, would you just push them away? Well, maybe you might, but odds are you probably wouldn't just push them away totally. You remember how when you were younger, lightning might have scared you or loud sounds might have. It's the same with Christ. He had the same experiences we have. He knows what frightens us, what worries us, what keeps us up at night. And he's pleased to hear about it from us, because he has brought us through glory to be the same family as him. By bringing us into his family, he has brought us to be family with God himself. We stand with God as family. And the suffering and the problems we endure, God himself and the Son have come to help us with them. Because Christ doesn't just want us to bring our fears to him. He wants us to know that he can help us with them. Hebrews 14 through 18 tells us that, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power over death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. Now, back in those times, man believed that most of their suffering was due to spirits. They felt their problems, their miseries, were due to the actions of demons tormenting them. Now, we might not believe that everything we suffer is due to the work of the devil. After all, if you lose your car keys, you probably won't blame the devil for it. But there are still machinations that the devil is behind. The weakness and greed and selfishness that our sin can motivate us towards that plays into the devil's hand. But Christ, in his own suffering, in his becoming human, has crushed even that. He understands our basic feelings of suffering so greatly that as a man, by becoming a man, he has shattered the actual power that suffering has over us. And he needed to be a man for it, because surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. The Jewish congregations at the time would have understood that easily. Jesus was here to help them, those who had come from Father Abraham. It was a direct family relation. Abraham was also part of Christ's family, and again tying them into the family with Jesus and with God. But we know today, too, that Abraham's family doesn't apply only to the Jewish people, but to all people who come to Christ and are welcomed into Christ's family by him. And he does welcome us. He isn't, as said before, ashamed to welcome us, because he knows us so well. And he knows us so well because he himself had chosen, for that time, to become lower than the angels as a man. That it was the only way for him to know and help us. 16 through 18 concludes, "For this reason we had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, that he might make atonement for the sins of people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted." Think on that. God cared so much and loved so much that he intended to make sure that there was a perfect priest, a representative of the people, who could atone for the people's sins and come to him. He made himself like us, came down to us through the Son, so that he might understand us, not just understand us, but that he might help us. There has never been a man to live who hasn't felt temptation. I feel temptation. You feel temptation. But there has only been one man who has never given in to temptation. But even though he never gave in, that didn't mean Jesus did not suffer in his temptations. Matthew 26:39 tells us that Jesus pleaded to have the need for him to be sacrificed taken from him. Jesus didn't just suffer on the cross, he suffered at the thought of the idea of even going upon it. You and I might not have to suffer that, but we suffer many other ways. We suffer with fears of our financial stability. We suffer with fears of prosperity for our children. We suffer with fears regarding health for parents and friends and ourselves. We suffer from our fear of death. And so often these fears tempt us to pull away and try things on our own. To think that we are the only ones who confront those fears on our own. To fall back on the idea that we alone have the answers. That we don't need anything else to give us the answers. That nothing else could help us but ourselves. But Christ can help us. He suffered all these fears just as we did. Every fear, every idea that causes you to suffer and torment, you can send to Christ. Nothing is too small for him to care about, for him to understand. Every one of those fears, he knew and suffered them too. And because he suffered them, he knows the temptation that comes from them. You aren't suffering alone and don't need to worry alone. Christ can help in your suffering. He relates to your suffering. And if you bring it to him, he can ease your suffering.